Okay. Hi, and welcome to the webcast Course Scheduling, the Impact on Student Success. I'm Colleen Flaherty, an editor at Inside Higher Ed and part of the Student Success team here. And I'm really looking forward to our discussion today about course scheduling, including who and what has traditionally driven course scheduling, if not student success, best practices for making course scheduling more of a student success tool, and how technology can help in this area. I'll start off today's discussion with some brief background on course scheduling and student success, including from recent Inside Higher Ed reporting in this area. And then we'll move on to a panel discussion with our experts, today's main event, who I'll briefly introduce now. We have Monica Parrish-Trent, Chief Program and Network Officer at Achieving the Dream, Tammy Agard, Managing Consultant at the American Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officers, or ACRO, Laura E. Boyer, Vice President for Academic Success at Northeast Lakeview College, part of the Alamo Colleges District, and Rebecca Brewer, Associate Registrar at Northern Arizona University. After the panel, we'll listen in on a brief chat between IHE co-founder and editor Doug Letterman and Brian Smith, Product Manager for Scheduling and Events at CourseDog, whose support is making today's webcast possible. Thank you. Then we'll move on to the audience Q&A at the end of the webcast. Please feel free to submit your questions for that at any time by clicking on the Q&A button in the menu at the bottom of your screen. You'll see only the questions that you submit, and you don't have to share your name or institution. But do feel free to include that information if you'd like. Last notes and housekeeping: we are recording and closed captioning today's webcast, and our colleague Jessica Chen is providing you links to captioning in the chat. And then we'll send you a copy of the recording and the presentation, including some helpful links of things that we're talking about in the next day or so. So just to get us started, some background, and I'm drawing heavily here on a report by Hanover Research that reviewed the extant literature on course scheduling. So some key findings there related to student success are that, number one, effective scheduling can boost student retention rates and reduce time to graduation by limiting bottlenecks and offering courses when students can actually take them. Number two, it's not enough to simply carry over the same or similar schedules from term to term, ignoring changing student demographics and evolving preferences. Number three, institutions need to collect, manage, and analyze course scheduling data like seat fill rates, enrollment caps, and space utilization. And this data should inform course scheduling in future terms to close the gap between students' course needs and actual offerings. Number four, most students today are predominantly interested in flexible scheduling options. And one way of offering this kind of flexibility is to design 7 to 8 week accelerated terms, even within the typical 15 to 16 week semester. Condensing courses in this way may be especially beneficial to working students by minimizing the opportunity for roadblocks. This is also something that Achieving the Dream has advocated at the community college level, writing in one guide on the topic that, quote, "there's nothing magical about offering 15 weeks of course delivery," and, quote, "providing flexibility with multiple on-ramps and fewer courses for shorter periods of time is helping colleges serve their students more equitably." That's because shorter academic terms allow for more immediate credit recovery in the event of a disruption and allow students to get back on track faster. One other flexible option is late start courses, which begin several weeks into the term so that students who switched from another class or otherwise started the term late don't have to play catch up or wait out the term altogether. Additional findings in the Hanover review are that commuter and part-time students may especially benefit from flexibility and data-driven scheduling. An institution should consider offering classes to accommodate traditional workday schedules, such as those starting at 6 p.m. instead of right at 5. Another idea is matching course demographics with schedules, meaning that if, say, a certain set of classes tend to attract many students who are parents, those courses could be offered within typical school hours. And last but not least, courses that are scheduled 2 times per week have been consistently linked with positive student outcomes. So in one 2010 study, students at a 4-year university in Texas enrolled in one of 3 different intermediate accounting class schedules. And they took place 1 time per week, 2 times per week, and 3 times per week. And students in the Monday, Wednesday, Friday section were significantly less successful in the class than their peers in the 2 and 1 time per week configurations in terms of the pass rate. So similarly, in another 2016 study, community college students who attended an algebra class once per week were outperformed by their peers in the twice weekly sections. So something else that we know about course scheduling, thanks to various studies, is that taking more credits per term is associated with higher retention rates, better academic performance, and increased likelihood of completion. One recent analysis found, for example, that just 7% of students taking 11 or fewer credit hours per year will ever graduate. This is something that drives Complete College America's 15 to Finish campaign, for example, which uses advertising, advisor engagement, and more to urge students who are able to do so to take more credits per semester. So it's kind of a momentum strategy. As for how courses are scheduled, ACRO surveyed over 700 undergraduate institutions in 2016 and found that the most popular factors in the overall scheduling process were, number one, faculty availability, number two, time block popularity. And in preparing for this webcast, I've definitely been hearing quite a bit about the prime time or prime real estate that is Tuesday/Thursday from about 10 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about that later. And then number three, courses scheduled at the same time from year to year. Interestingly, data collected from student plans of study was one of the least influential factors on the list. And ACRO asked a very similar question in another 2022 survey, and the answers really hadn't changed much from 2016. In a report covering that 2022 survey and other topics, ACRO found that class scheduling, quote, remains one of the last holdouts in higher education to embrace student-centric practices. The report also argues for the use of data-driven decision-making and recommends the use of data to initiate conversations to move student-centric undergraduate class scheduling practices forward. Just a few other findings from that 2022 ACRO report. You can see here 78% of institutions' faculty preference remains a strong influence in determining when, where, and in what delivery modality undergraduate classes will be offered. Only 27% of respondents agree or strongly agree that their institution engages in student-centered class scheduling. And fewer than half of institutional respondents have and use undergraduate class scheduling software. So there's lots of room for opportunity, harnessing of data, and innovation here. And here I'm just sharing some additional data from students. So Inside Higher Ed and College Pulse partnered in a student voice survey last year to ask 3,000 2- and 4-year college students about complications that they've experienced while registering for classes, among other topics. And these are just the top 5 issues students cited from a longer list of options of problems encountered in registering. And the top 2 options in particular speak to course scheduling. So the number 1 reported registration woe was that a class the student needed to graduate wasn't available the semester they wanted to take it, with about a quarter of 2-year students and a third of 4-year students saying they've experienced this. And the number 2 issue was a class that the student needed to take filled up before they could register, with about a fifth of 2-year respondents saying that they experienced this and a third of 4-year respondents saying so. So this doesn't necessarily mean that registration issues delayed students' graduation timelines, and many, if not most, institutions do also prioritize registration for students closer to graduation to avoid this kind of delay. But in our survey, at least, students who expected to graduate on time were more likely than those who didn't to say that they had experienced no listed problems with registration. So smooth registration correlates, again, at least in our survey, with timely graduation. Registration problems of any kind in the survey were also much more likely among 4-year students than 2-year students. And there are a lot of reasons for that, I think. And here I've just included some analysis of the issue and color commentary from experts we talked to for a story on the survey, including Terry O'Banion, a senior professor of practice and educational leadership at Kansas State University, which I think speaks to technology's ability to potentially help in this area. He told me that if technology can map almost every street in the US, it can surely be designed to calculate the number of students who will need which courses in the coming semester to meet graduation and next step requirements. That is, if colleges and universities want to serve the crucial needs of students. So here in the introduction, before I finish up, I just wanted to highlight the Alamo Colleges District for a moment because they're innovating and following best practices in some of the ways that we've discussed and some that I haven't mentioned yet. First of all, last fall in our Student Success newsletter, we wrote about how the 5 colleges that make up Alamo Colleges have been allowing students for about a year now to register for classes up to 3 semesters at a time, to increase students' sense of momentum, that word again, and more practically give them much more consistency about their schedule, what their schedules will look like, and more ability to plan. The colleges are innovating in other ways too, which Laura can tell us about in a bit, but these include using 8-week terms, developing degrees that can be completed in 18 months and using flex terms to expedite completion, and using scheduling analytics and predictive analytics to help build a student-centered schedule, which helps identify predicted demand for courses, not only based on historical enrollment trends, but also student degree pathways. And some of that can be disaggregated by modality and even time of day. At Northeast Lakeview College in particular, Laura and her colleagues have figured out that students are mixing and matching both 8 and 16-week courses, and data show that students who are using the 8-week term option are increasing their credit hours per semester, which, as I mentioned, is an indicator of ultimate completion. The college also uses uniform class times, which isn't always a given. Okay, and then Rebecca can tell us more about this in a bit, but in terms of scheduling at Northern Arizona University, I want to quickly highlight how technology helped optimize the university's earlier move to a centralized scheduling system, really by allowing academic departments to continue to build their own schedules while putting in place some important checks and balances that promote effective and efficient scheduling and, by extension, student success. NAU's adoption of a centralized, customized course scheduling platform in 2021 helped enforce institutional policies about course scheduling, eliminate basic errors and bottlenecks, monitor real-time enrollment, and, like at Alamo colleges, provide predictive data about what courses to offer when. And this data, in turn, has been used successfully in promoting a culture of evidence versus just tradition or faculty preference around course scheduling, and really building buy-in to the concept that the course schedule is a student success tool, or that it can be. So within a year of adopting a course scheduling platform, the university saw a 60% reduction in course scheduling conflicts, a 14% drop in overfilled sections, and hundreds of hours saved in terms of auditing errors and enforcing policies. So now moving on to our expert panel, I'd like to welcome you all again and start with you, Monica, if you don't mind. So I was wondering if you could just tell us, kind of taking a really big picture approach here, from your experience, including your work at Achieving the Dream, what really is the connection between course scheduling and student success?
Thank you, Colleen, for the question, and thank you for having me as a part of this important conversation. So I would say in the community college sector, there's been a lot of attention on this issue for a while because our students have a lot that they are processing daily. And the shift during COVID really helped some of those things that our students are balancing come to the forefront of our mind. And there have been lessons for us around the flexibility that we need to ensure that our students can be successful, and this is in large part due to who our students are. They're adult learners who are working, they have families and other life responsibilities. And on the other end of that spectrum is the growth in dual enrollment. And these are students who are young and coming to college for the first time, as well as first generation students and students who are parents and other caregivers, as well as working. So we know that the average age of the community college student is 27, 30% of community college students are first generation, and 66% of our students are part-time. We also know that our work around holistic student supports, which include really helping our students to understand the struggle between balancing life and an education. And as a result, we know that we need to be flexible around scheduling. If students can't come to campus because of the constraints in their lives, they're not going to be able to earn their credentials. And we know that scheduling can slow down progression or even cause some students to stop out. So generally speaking, the last thing we want to do is create course schedules that are an additional barrier. And we really want to think about centering our students and their lived experiences as we build out our course schedules. But I also want to share that this isn't just about course schedules. It's much larger than this. Scheduling has to be part of program design that allows students to not just access education, but to be successful. And we're really talking about equitable outcomes for all students, because essentially this is really an equity issue. Students who have complex lives and who are first generation poverty impacted, they need additional support in order to be successful. And college success is one class at a time until you ultimately earn your credential or certification to enter into the workforce.
Mhm. Definitely, and I'm really happy that you brought up the equity piece of this. I think because that is huge. And just again, in terms of your work with achieving the dream and your experiencing in your experience, what are some promising course scheduling practices that you've advocated for or heard of? Maybe some that I have mentioned, some that I haven't.
A great question. So I would certainly say shortened academic terms. And one of the things that's interesting about the conversation around shortened academic terms is that we sometimes forget that this isn't new. Summer courses have been around for decades. It's certainly how I was able to earn my degree, back in the 80s and early 90s. And so we know that um, course content can be delivered in a range of formats, right? They can be delivered in 8 and 16 weeks. They can be delivered high flex. They can be delivered virtually. They can be delivered in person. And so I would say shortened academic terms because what we've seen from some of our colleges, in particular Odessa, I know we're going to hear from the Alamo College District, Waukesha County Technical College are just a couple of examples where they looked at the data and they saw that students were dropping around the 6th, 7th, 8th week mark, right? And that's for some almost halfway through the semester. And we definitely saw this in COVID. Our institutions that had shortened academic terms, when COVID hit in March, they were almost there. They were able to get those 3 credits. Students who were in a 15-week course who just because of COVID, it was such a life-altering moment. They just had to stop. They had to settle their souls and they had to think about their priorities. And so we know that shortened academic terms can increase retention for students. There's data that shows that. It can also increase student success. And I want to mention that Waukesha County Technical College, they recently created an article and published it in the Community College Journal of Research and Practice. And it looks at their overall success rate of going from 16 to 8 weeks. And they saw significant improvement across gender, race, ethnicity, and for adult learners age 25 and older. And so we do know that that works, but it's not the only thing that has to be considered with the process. The other thing that I would mention are open educational resources. We know that 1 in 8 students, based on a study we did with SRI as part of our OER initiative, 1 in 8 students drops a class because they can't afford the learning materials. So we know that open educational resources and Z courses that allow students to take classes without the additional burden of learning materials is also something that we've seen prove to be successful for our students. And the last example that I would give you are the high flex courses, and those high flex courses that offer an opportunity for students to take their class in person and virtually. And I know we're going to hear from one of my colleagues about the technology that needs to be really strong in order for a high flex course, an online course, an 8-week course to be successful. There's that technical component.
Mhm. I'm really glad you brought that up. And it's good to know that there is a lot of evidence to support the 8-week model. And beyond just building momentum, that there may be something else kind of driving student success there. And what words of advice or wisdom do you have for institutions looking to better center students when it comes to course scheduling? Like any kind of mantra or key principles to keep in mind, institutions kind of starting down this path?
That's a great question. So we created a shortened academic terms guide and workbook a few years ago because we had colleges saying that they have the data that shows that shortened academic terms could be successful because they were looking at students' dropout rates. But the move to shortened academic terms requires some organizational agility and culture work, right? To shift from something that is traditional and to some extent labor intensive, right? And so one of the things that we talk a lot about is, first of all, build the case for change. You need to look at the data. You need to know your students, both qualitatively and quantitatively. We also talk a lot about making sure that you are partnering effectively with those that are most involved. And so if it's your K through 12 partners, if it's the supports that are around adult learners and parenting students and first gen students and students who are in classes that don't have academic credit, what are those wraparound supports that they're going to need if you move to something like shortened academic terms or high flex courses, Z degrees, OER? The other thing that I would say is really the keys to success for any kind of culture work that is substantive change that's going to impact not just the students, but the institution, is to think about the intentional communication. You have to build a case for the why for the students and for the employees. They both need case building, and that's not always the same message, right? Ensuring that there's professional development, professional learning, and support for the students and the employees. And so if you're moving to high flex courses or open educational resources, there's a need to develop the faculty, the instructors, the advisors who are going to be responsible for implementing this change. I would also mention providing the kind of infrastructure that's needed to lead the work at all levels, because we want to think about the process, we want to think about the procedures, and we want to think about the implementation. And also evaluate and include continuous process improvement, because the first time out isn't always successful. And if you're not continuously trying to improve and looking at the data and the impact on the overall organization, you could make a move too soon that could fail, not because the idea was wrong, but because the implementation was wrong. So those are some strategies that I would recommend.
Interesting. Okay, I especially like the support piece that you mentioned. I mean, this work has to be intentional and it has to be very supported, not only in terms of think of building, support for the ideas, but also the infrastructure piece that you mentioned. So thank you so much. And just for now, I wanted to move on to Tammy, who's going to provide us with the ACRO perspective, and of course, lots of other kinds of professional experience. But Tammy, you and I talked a little bit about, prior to this webcast about, this idea that student success hasn't traditionally been at the center of course scheduling. So if not course scheduling, who or what has traditionally driven this process?
Well, I think higher education is steeped in tradition. And so I think a lot of tradition has influenced the course schedule. But I also think, based on that survey that was done by ACRO that said that faculty preferences and getting faculty to teach, faculty have really been at the center of the course scheduling process. And well, that has worked well for a long time, especially working perhaps with more traditional age learners. There is a need to expand those faculty preference, expand beyond that to the student space, and really have that paradigm shift to thinking what's best for the learners themselves, as opposed to having it completely along the lines of when a faculty member wants to teach a particular course and in what format and what length of time, which has been what we've done before. And in many ways, we've just done what I call a lather, rinse, and repeat model of course scheduling, where we have just taken similar like terms and rolled them over to fall to fall, spring to spring, and really haven't done a zero-based scheduling exercise unless we were implementing some new technology that required us to do that. And even at that point, I don't know how much analysis was done or if it was just the mechanics of reloading a schedule into a different platform. And so there's really a need, as Monica said, to step back and use the data and take a look at where you're headed and how you can best serve the learners long term.
And then you've helped a lot of institutions through your work with ACRO Consulting put students more at the center of course scheduling. So I'm curious, when institutions are starting down this path or, improving processes already, that are active, what are some common challenges that they tend to face? And essentially, common challenges that arrive in essentially in putting students at the center of course scheduling.
A lot of challenges that institutions face tend to revolve around the shared governance model, the strong faculty governance, and those preferences at institutions. And so while individuals perhaps on the enrollment side or can see these trends, and really having a strong institutional partner or academic partner, a strong leader on the academic side, whether that be at the provost level or other, that can help to push the scheduling, the change in course scheduling to a more student-centered approach is really, really critical. And also, as we think about making the case for this, and I think utilizing the opportunity to use those early adopters, and that can help you to move this process along. I would say that, as Monica said, at the community college, they perhaps a little more agile, a little more nimble in this respect, and perhaps other departments that perhaps maybe rely less on tenure track faculty and more on instructors or adjuncts that have a different contracting agreement that would allow you to slot them in different ways at different times, as opposed to a very rigid approach that might be advocated by your more traditional tenure track faculty.
Mhm. And you've mentioned faculty a couple of times, obviously a huge, piece of what's, a factor behind what's driven course scheduling. In a lot of ways that makes sense. How do you build faculty buy-in for some of these new approaches?
I think one of the best places to start is with a set of guiding principles. So if the institution can agree on a set of guiding principles, like one of our things is we are going to put the student at the center of our scheduling process, or we're going to be look for flexible ways to meet student needs, whatever those set of guiding principles can be, and being able to use those faculty governance areas, faculty senate, your other governance structures to help co-create that set of guiding principles. Then when it comes down to those disagreements, which there will definitely be, you can point back to those guiding principles and say, how does this schedule fit with what we already agreed upon? And engaging them in that way. And I could talk about faculty in a way that, because I know they want to help students succeed. That's why they're in this business. But sometimes they just need a little more structure around what that looks like and help them along the way. And so using their natural curiosity, their natural ability to build programs and to build solutions, and using it in this way to not only design initially the guiding principles, but then also expand that beyond to what the optimal course schedule would look like.
Mhm. I like that. And data, I imagine too, we've heard, I think Monica mentioned it, and in some of the background that, that I provided, I was seeing again and again in the literature that data-driven decision making, and essentially like making a case through data can be a way to build buy-in for some of these new approaches. And then you and I also talked a little bit before this webcast about the gap between what students need in terms of course scheduling often, and what is offered, and ways to close that gap. And I think a part of that is kind of uncovering actual student demand for courses, versus what students end up enrolling in based on what's offered. So I was wondering what ideas you have about current and maybe even future opportunities for uncovering actual student demand for courses.
I think we've come a long way in being able to have those tools available to us. Obviously, degree planning software that's out there that looks at not just a degree audit that looks backward at what the student already took, but looks at what the need will be going forward. Some systems have actually require students to complete an 8-semester degree plan in the software. So they have an idea how many students will need a given course or plan to take a given course in a given semester. So that can be extremely helpful. Also utilizing changing how we're utilizing wait lists.
Mhm.
Oftentimes waitlisting is available in registration systems, but it can be limited. We might limit the wait list to only a certain number, or waitlist data might be purged at the beginning of a term for good reason, in that you don't want students automatically getting enrolled in a class late
Yeah.
into the term. But being able to offload that waitlist data into a data warehouse where you can run more analytics on it, and being able to look at point in time registration, so that we're not just looking at everything that happened at the end and doing a postmortem on what happened at the end of the registration period, but being able to do snapshots along the way to see how that registration is building, and being able, based on that, to make adjustments, whether it be to not only time of day, but modality, and expanding those offerings beyond what we currently have. And then asking our students, using survey data, asking our students and potential students, and it could be individuals who elected to go somewhere else, who we thought were in our pipeline, asking them, if we had offered a different type of schedule, would you have been more likely to enroll? And getting that feedback from them to see if that made any kind of a impact on their decision to enroll, and retain, looking at our stop out students as well as to why they're stopping out.
Mhm. I like that. A lot of uses for data, looking forward, looking backward, analyzing in real time kind of what's happening. Well, thank you so much. And just for now, I'm going to move on to Laura from Alamo Colleges. So Laura, for you, kind of similar to my first question for Monica, but from a specific institutional perspective, what, in your experience, is the connection between student success and course scheduling?
For us, from a institutional perspective, the link between the schedule has been really central to student success. We understand and have monitored for several years the average credit hours per semester that our students are taking, and understanding that as those increase, their success increases and our graduation increases. The report you mentioned earlier, where students taking, I think 6 credit hours or below, or only had 7% graduation. Students who are taking 9 credits per semester had a 50% graduation rate. And so there's significant increases by increasing the number of credit hours students are taking, even in the part-time realm, from, from 6 to 9, 9 to 11. And so our schedule has been central to our students being able to increase their average credit hours per semester. And that's one of the metrics that we use to monitor our schedule, and the efficiency of our schedule and the effectiveness of our schedule.
Mm-hmm. And then what are some of the challenges that you faced in trying to, center student success and course scheduling? And then what's been helpful in clearing some of those hurdles?
Several of those have been mentioned, but of course, helping faculty understand how the schedule impacts student success has been really important for us to bring our department chairs and our faculty really on board with the utilization of predictive analytics and data to really build the schedule, so that they can really understand the impact that has on whether or not how a student can or will be able to earn the degrees. And of course, faculty care about student success. They care about students completing. And so utilizing data and the analytics has really helped us move that conversation with faculty, not only on implementing 8 weeks, but increasing online offerings, and we've had experimented with high flex courses. All of those things, we've been able to use the data with faculty to help get some early adopters, but also now really expand the adopters within our faculty within those flexible options.
Mm-hmm. And then I mentioned a few things that you're doing in terms of experimenting with course scheduling for student success in my intro. But I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about, essentially how you're innovating with the course schedule for student success.
So within the district, within Alamo Colleges, one of the innovations that we implemented last year was the year-round registration. This was a big change, but it allows students, in March and April, when they traditionally can only register for a fall term, to actually be able to plan out their entire academic year and register for fall, spring, and summer courses. This gives students not only flexibility because of the different terms and modalities we're using, but that predictability of the schedule, because it's not just offering flexibility, it's offering flexibility that is predictable, that the students can count on having from term to term and being able to plan out. So that's been really impactful, that year-round registration. It also helps us from an enrollment perspective to be able to see further in advance how demand is shifting for courses, which is helpful from an enrollment management perspective. Additionally, we're intentionally across the district expanding 8-week terms. We are utilizing the ATD playbook. That is one of the resources we have as we do that, but specifically also in our workforce programs to be able to decrease the time to completion. And so we're developing workforce programs that can be completed in 15 to 18 months. Also implementing 8-week terms with the baccalaureate degrees that are being implemented at the Alamo colleges, so that students can really decrease that time to degree, which we know is so important. At Northeast Lakeview, though, I think where we've really innovated the most is with the use of the predictive analytics and the data-informed scheduling. We actually build our schedule first based on the information we receive from our data analytics, and then we assign faculty. So faculty do have preference in the sense that we have the schedule that we build, and then from there they have preference to be able to choose from what we're offering. But faculty preference doesn't choose the schedule. And so we build the schedule that we believe students are going to need, that's going to be the most effective, and then we assign faculty. And it also allows us to identify where we need to get more faculty online certified, where we need to increase night offerings, time of day offerings, because we can disaggregate all of that data, and we monitor it throughout the registration for a semester by modality, by time of day, by flex terms, so we can see how the trends are moving, and we can make real-time changes to our schedule throughout registration. And what that does is it really decreases those last-minute cancellations that really are a roadblock for students to succeed, because they can count on those courses making. And we have a significant number of metrics that we use to monitor our schedule as well. So we have a metric of a 90% average fill rate across the institution, which is a really high fill rate expectation. But what that does is it allows us to run the 8-week terms, some of the courses that students need to graduate, some of those courses that may have lower enrollment. It allows us to run them because overall we have a high fill rate. And also for me, just personally, that high fill rate and that expectation is, for me, enrollment is about access and allowing students to be able to progress. So the more seats we have filled, the higher fill rates. I know that we have the highest number of students who are able to access their courses that we can with the faculty resources that we have. So we're utilizing those as efficiently and effectively so students can progress.
Right. That's true. When in looking at some of the literature, I noticed that there was, a student success component in terms of, optimizing course scheduling, but that using the course schedule as a student success tool can often lead to increased efficiency in terms of institutional resources. Well, I really appreciate that. And just for now, we will move on to Rebecca at Northern Arizona University. Rebecca, welcome. And so you were at the university when it initially went to a centralized scheduling model. So could you tell us a little bit about that process, and then how centralized scheduling makes the course schedule more student-centric?
I'd take myself off mute. That would be helpful, right?
No problem.
When I first started here, it was the 2016, and we did not have a course scheduling platform set up at that point. So we were using minimal technology at that point. Our PeopleSoft school So we pretty much had PeopleSoft, and we used a classroom optimizer program, but that was pretty much it. And the concept behind it was predominantly at first, actually room utilization rather than a student-centric schedule. But as time went on, it moved into a much more student-centric schedule, or rather student-centric focus rather. And initially it was a lot of manual labor for us. And we worked with departments. We had like a roadshow style of introduction to this centralized scheduling model. It was sort of semi-centralized. Departments would still be putting their schedule into a spreadsheet and then sending it to us. And we would be the ones to put it into PeopleSoft. So long story short, it's a huge amount of work. But meeting folks individually with us was helpful in establishing a more diplomatic relationship with the department. So that was kind of the first level step. And then as time went on, we implemented a course scheduling platform that we went live with in fall of 2020. And since then, it has made for a lot more focus on, much easier rather, focus on student-centric scheduling. We have seen like a tremendous reduction in just basic errors, which were roadblocks to students. We would see departments that would forget to put in their grading basis on dual grading basis classes. And if we didn't catch it when we were entering the class, because when you're dealing with thousands of classes, it's easy to miss it. Those classes wouldn't be viewable when students went to enroll. So using a course scheduling platform, it immediately flags those errors so the department can see it. We can see it too, and they're alerted to the error. There's lots of little errors like that. As we've set up our rules in our course scheduling platform, we were able to put things like stopping departments from late cancellations of 100 and 200 level classes. So it forces them to send in a request to us, and then that is an approval process with the VPAO's office, our Vice Provost of Academic Operations, and they approve whether this class can be canceled at this late juncture. So it really reduces, like, suddenly these, sophomore and freshman students are left out in the cold. And that's really dropped that hugely. Enforcing standard meeting times, which means students can optimize their schedule. We've been able to set up rules that say, oh, wait, this class isn't approved for non-standard time. And that forces the department to reach out to us. And there's an approval process if they say they have to be non-standard, but it really gets folks thinking, oh, this class should be non-standard. I can't just go in and schedule a class for whenever an instructor or department wants it. They need to follow standard times. So that was part of the initial process. It was a huge undertaking, a lot of manual labor. And once we moved into having a course scheduling platform, it made it so much easier. And move away from just room utilization and into much more beyond that, into student-centered scheduling.
Well, you anticipated my second question for you, because I definitely wanted to ask about how technology was helping flag, deviations from best practices.
Right.
Do you have any other, kind of quick examples of things that the system sort of catches for you and forces in terms of best practices?
Absolutely. One thing we had a huge problem with initially was huge bottlenecks in class scheduling. Everyone wanted to offer classes, like you're saying earlier, Tuesday, Thursday between 11:10 and 2:30. And it was hard to get folks out of that. That was faculty-driven preference. And now when the department is inputting their schedule into our course scheduling platform, once they reach beyond about 25% of their classes during super peak times, it gives them a warning saying, hey, you've reached your quota. You need to spread it out. And we've now seen, like, not just Tuesday, Thursday, but more use of Monday, Wednesday, more use of all of our meeting patterns. which is very student-centered. Students couldn't progress before when all your classes are offered within a 3-hour block of time, or
Right,
most of them,
right.
you can't progress.
Wow. And I think you'd even mentioned like anecdotally, the parking situation on
Yes,
campus has improved just through,
yes.
so the ripple effects, right?
The ripple effects, yeah, we no longer have a traffic control officer.
Oh, wow.
At least one intersection that was super busy.
So interesting.
Mhm.
Okay, so now just to preserve as much time as possible for the audience Q&A, I'm going to throw it over to Inside Higher Ed co-founder and editor Doug Letterman for a short interview with Brian Smith, product manager for scheduling and events at CourseDog, today's sponsor, before we start up the audience Q&A. And again, please feel free to submit questions at any time so we can get to those in the next segment.
And Brian, thanks again for being here. Thanks to CourseDog for its support. For those of you who aren't familiar, CourseDog is a platform that works with institutions on scheduling, student pathways, and other academic operations. So again, thanks for supporting this, and thanks for being here. So as you listen to Colleen and our panelists talk about the link between scheduling and student success and some of the approaches institutions have adopted to improve their policies and processes, what kind of most resonated with what you're seeing in your work at CourseDog?
Yeah, definitely. And thanks, Doug, and everyone at Inside Higher Ed for letting us be a part of this. I learned a ton already just from this session. So thank you all for letting us support here. But there's so much that was touched on that resonates with the work we're doing. From Monica shared a lot of interesting ideas around student success courses, building scheduling that works for students who are working or commuting, thinking about, I think Jamie mentioned a couple of ideas about making sure adjunct faculty aren't overworked. There's a lot that we think about both inside what I work on, which is scheduling, and some of our other products where we help institutions look at kind of the big picture that resonated. But going back to the initial survey that Colleen walked us through, that one first or second stat really jumped out at me, where faculty needs and preferences are still first and second in what's factored into scheduling, and that student-centric idea is still kind of lagging way behind the bottom of that chart. And we spend a lot of time trying to help schools with that, providing data like heat maps, making sure that section relationships aren't violated so students can get into the 2 courses they need to get into in given terms. It's really just that main idea that we spend so much time trying to help institutions. They know they want to get there, but how do we get there without a scheduling tool or kind of updating our process is something we spend a lot of time on.
What tends to make the light bulbs go off for institutions and particularly maybe for faculty members in terms of being sort of making that shift from student-centered policies on something like scheduling in those conversations? I mean, I think we know that the faculty are professionals who want their students to succeed, but what tends to help them make the shift to being willing to embrace that move?
Yeah, 2 things come to mind. Both of them are return on investment related. So one thing is when schools are doing kind of that traditional, we're just going to roll our schedule quarter to quarter, term to term, and then we're able to start showing, well, this creates this many bottlenecks, or you have this huge red area of your heat map from 10 to 2 on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and we can start to help schools visualize and understand how that's affecting students. That really comes up early in our process of working with them when we're helping them change the way they roll over terms, and the light bulb will sometimes go off then. And another thing that I was thinking of, as Laura was speaking about helping faculty understand what impact this actually has on students, it all comes down to that data and being able to show faculty and show departments without showing them all of the data, because I know that can get delicate and political at times, but showing faculty, hey, we have demand analytics on this section and it's underfilled, so we're just going to decrease the size of the section, or we have all this info on bottlenecks, or all the different analytics that we can actually condense and show to faculty in a way that just helps them understand, we do want to take your preferences into account, but it really affects students when we're not able to offer a wide variety of times or whatever we're looking to do. Just really boiling it down to the ROI institution-wide and for individual departments. really helps from my experience.
It's great. All right. Well, thank you again, Brian, and thanks, Course Dog. And we're going to switch it back to Colleen and Melissa and the great panel. Thanks a lot.
Thanks again, Doug and Brian. And Brian, I love the idea of a heat map. I found that really fascinating, and I can kind of see it based on what I've learned. Again, thanks so much. And now it's time for the audience Q&A. Inside Higher Ed editor Melissa Ezerick, who oversees our student success coverage, including our free daily student success newsletter, has been standing by and sorting through your questions submitted to the chat. It's not too late to ask any burning questions that you have, so go ahead and do that now, but over to you, Melissa.
Thanks, Colleen. So a couple people have asked some research questions, and I don't know that this research is available, but I'm just going to kind of throw it out there just for, questions that we may consider as we're thinking about all these topics. So someone had asked about how toxic course combinations can affect course scheduling and then the impact on student success of that. And then someone else had asked about research on how successful students have been in introductory math and science courses. This was a STEM professor just kind of concerned about things like chemistry, physics, and calculus being those shortened terms. So I guess a lot of faculty have the perception that shortened terms are not good instructional delivery methods for their types of rigorous courses. So those are just some things to keep in mind. Someone else asked, how does having multiple short-term options affect financial aid disbursement schedules? Can anyone address that? And especially this is a particularly messy year for financial aid.
Anything to say in, sort of generally about financial aid and how it might be affected, through course scheduling and student success, or how they're related? And maybe while you're thinking, I just wanted to jump in. Melissa, we have a story running tomorrow in the student success newsletter about DFW rates. And those often happen in the kind of courses that you mentioned with the previous question. DFW rates in those kinds of courses that, first year gateway courses tend to be higher. And yet we are writing about a scalable model that's proven very promising at Georgia State that now the University Innovation Alliance is trying. And that is actually based on an accelerated retake option. And they're seeing a lot of success there. So just pushing back, I guess, a little bit on the idea that those kinds of courses can't be effective in an accelerated model. But the caveat there is that students are very supported in this accelerated model with some additional instruction, et cetera.
Yeah, this is Tammy. So just a couple of things. As far as the toxic course combinations, I would refer you to the University of Cincinnati. They've done a lot of work in the student success realm around toxic course combinations. And so taking a look at them or reaching out specifically to the University of Cincinnati, they might be able to give you some really good information on how they have done that specific research and applied it in a student success way. With respect to financial aid, yes, it does complicate things because oftentimes, depending on how your students are registered, if they're not, you cannot disperse aid for courses that have not started. And so you tend to have to schedule that disbursement if they're doing a series of 2 8-week classes or 2 7-week classes, then you're having to make sure that you're not dispersing the aid for the second part of that term until the approved time frame ahead of when that course starts. And so that can be challenging for students who are trying to perhaps cover larger living expenses and other types of things, but it does require that additional working with students and educating them about what those implications might be.
Thanks, Tammy. Appreciate you grabbing that one. Here's a very specific question for Laura at Alamo Colleges. This attendee is wondering if there are subjects and times given for each term when students are planning a year-long schedule. So for example, in the fall, can they see the actual dates and times of the spring and summer schedules?
Yes, actually, the entire schedule is built out for the entire year. So students can see fall, spring, and all the summer terms all the courses, times, days, the regular schedule you would see when you're registering one semester at a time.
Great, thank you. Someone else is asking about a best practices question, ways to identify appropriate minimum enrollment for various course sections. I think this person said their school is, pushing for higher minimum enrollments. So considering different types of courses with different enrollment caps, lectures, labs, studios, clinicals, how does that come into play in this whole puzzle of figuring out the schedule, the enrollment numbers?
So I would say from my previous work as a dean and a provost, looking at the enrollment numbers, there are a number of factors, right? So you're looking at seat utilization, you're looking at overall enrollment in a program or overall enrollment in a course. I think really thinking through what is the overall enrollment goal for the institution will often allow some classes to be what we call under enrolled, as long as there are X percentage of classes that are at enrollment. So there's no real magic number to it, but there are a number of factors that are being considered, to include room utilization. How many courses, on any given day need to use a particular room? And those are the kinds of things that are really part of the conversation. If you're talking about a room that's a lab for a particular discipline, a room with the smart instructor station, a room with the fab lab, they really have to factor in all of the disciplines that need that room and the overall enrollment.
I can speak to that too. We use, in addition to our fill rates, we use an average class size of 25. That's based on our facilities and our classrooms. And so that's an overall institutional average, and meeting that average allows us, as you said, to run, to have multiple courses that have caps that are lower based on, what they need instructionally and for student success. And also then to run courses that when we start the semester have low enrollment. If we've met that metric, it allows us all that flexibility to continue to offer those courses that are having the lower enrollment that students need for that semester.
Great, thank you. Looks like we probably have time for at least one more question. Someone's wondering, how do we account for students changing academic programs when assessing the demand for courses and planning ahead?
That's a difficult one. Even with predictive analytics, it's not perfect. And so students do change their majors frequently. And that's just something that I think intuitively, if you have some information about your students, if there are patterns in those changes in major, but that's one that would get caught in the predictive analytics eventually through historical trends. But it would be difficult to account for that, in real time each semester.
I would add to that, one of the things that we're seeing at Achieving the Dream are those detailed course program maps that they support what Laura said in terms of the institution having an idea of which courses need to be offered in sequence based on students' programs. And while students can change their major, working with course program maps does provide some of the data that Laura mentioned are needed to kind of anticipate how many of each section of a course is needed, to include in-person, virtual, etc.
So many moving parts in all of this.
I think we have time for one more question, quick.
So someone from a community college noted that a lot of students are self-advising and don't create academic plans. Any ideas for kind of, making advising mandatory without turning that into a barrier for enrollment? It gets us, slightly away from the actual registration, but still very key.
I'll jump in and then ask my colleagues to join me. Yes, we understand that mandatory advising is a best practice. Students do better when they have an informed conversation around their goals and their life in order to help them select programs with social and economic mobility and build schedules for courses that they can actually attend and complete. That said, it can be a burden on the institution and the student for a range of reasons. Not discounting that it is a best practice. So one thing I would say is going back to the course programs, self-advising that allows you to self-register without any consequences is problematic for the student and faculty and the institution. So there has to be some kind of fail-safe method that at least requires students, especially early in their program, to have someone else ensure that they are indeed registered for classes that are part of their degree that are going to lead to their certificate or whatever program they're enrolled in.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, well, it is 3 o'clock. The hour just tends to fly by. So thank you all so much for joining us today. All of our panelists, everyone in the audience, everyone from CourseDog and from Inside Higher Ed here. Please keep in touch with us through email, tips, and opinion submissions, and of course, social media. And again, thanks so much to our sponsor for this webcast, CourseDog, and we'll see you next time.